Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute podcast. I'm your host, Rowena Itchon. We can hardly be a California-based think tank without talking about the film and entertainment industry. Our guest in this podcast is Patrick Reasonover. He runs Taliesin Nexus, a nonprofit organization that brings together aspiring liberty-minded writers, directors, cinematographers, and producers with experienced professionals in the film and entertainment industry. I met Patrick several years ago when he helped produce PRI's video series, Jackpot Justice, and a short video on digital learning in the classroom. Tim Anaya, PRI's Director of Communications, and I chatted with Patrick about the programs he offers, some of their current projects, and of course, the state of the TV and film industry. We think you'll enjoy this. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's podcast, Patrick.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
You're the founder of Taliesin Nexus, a nonprofit that brings together up-and-coming filmmakers and experienced industry pros who share a passion for liberty and free markets. First of all, how did you come up with the name and what does it mean?
Well, I kind of have a specialty in coming up with very difficult to pronounce names that are also difficult to remember, apparently. It's not only with this nonprofit, but other ventures I have done. But actually, it is meaningful. Taliesin is the name of a 4th century Welsh bard, apocryphal bard, who's known as the father of storytelling in kind of the Celtic tradition. Also apocryphally known as the father of Merlin the Wizard. But we chose Taliesin because, we're a nexus or network of storytellers. The organization is not an institute that promulgates a certain viewpoint or ideology. It's more just a collection of storytellers from the experienced industry pros to those who are trying to break into the business who share an affinity for the values of liberty and the traditional American values of the founding.
So, Patrick, we know that Hollywood and the film and television industry is dominated by the left. So how is your organization trying to change that?
That's a really great question. And what I'd like to do is kind of reframe it somewhat, if you don't mind. It's funny to me whenever we talk about right and left, as though there's like this real estate in the mind. I always wonder, what's up and down? I guess that's like the power center that the left and the right are trying to get a hold of. I think saying that folks are on the left and folks are on the right makes sense when you're talking about political ideology, where you sort of have these poles you're gravitating towards, maybe like equality on the left or some form of like order or liberty on the right. And that's the framework. But when you're a storyteller, the subject of your art is not ideology or ideas. It's people, it's humans, the heart, it's the life and the journey and the emotional conflicts that you pursue through your life. I think that rather than saying that what we're really trying to do is to sort of change Hollywood from like a left-dominated politics, really, I think what we are hoping to achieve is to help facilitate the careers of filmmakers who really believe in that classic storytelling and classic values of American life, and they want to express those ideas and explore them in narrative, and really avoid a kind of ideological storytelling, which I think that's really what dominates Hollywood, from a progressive standpoint, the progressive ideology. But even we see it in, efforts from, so-called conservative films, which typically fail at the marketplace when they're advertised as such, because, it's just another form of ideology. And I think when you have ideology in a story where characters are mouthpieces and they start arguing, you rip the audience out of the story, and it's just bad. It's propaganda and it's bad stories. And I think audiences recognize that, and they reject that. Those films don't typically do very well. And so often you'll find these ideological messages sort of stuffed into, what's otherwise an action film or a superhero film or something of that nature. And, I kind of think in some ways it's a betrayal of the audience, as you're sort of trying to talk down to them rather than, really crafting a story that digs into the identity of the characters and is honest and has integrity when it comes to the narrative. And I think if we simply try to facilitate the careers of folks who are interested in that kind of storytelling, then we'll see the films and television shows in Hollywood gravitate more, I think, perhaps to something that we all would find very edifying. Stories that truly explore the meaning and value of liberty in our lives, the meaning and value of honor and family, and those kind of values that often on the right we feel are underserved in Hollywood. But that's really kind of what we're about, really trying to identify filmmakers who have those kinds of sensibilities, who want to explore those values and narratives narratives in their work, and then connecting them to mentors and giving them opportunities to do so.
Well, I'm disappointed to hear that I was probably the only person to actually pay money to go see An American Carol back in the days.
Right. I mean, I know there's an impulse. There's an impulse to sort of think, well, Hollywood is dominated by the progressive left, and so we need a conservative alternative, to sort of balance it. I think that's wrongheaded. I think, ultimately we don't need to do the same bad thing in a different way. We need to do is something really good and edifying that audiences love, that, isn't just entertainment. It's about enlightenment, watching a story and reflecting upon the meaning and the decisions of the characters, and then taking that wisdom with you into your own life to help you better understand who you are, your community, and make decisions, both moral and political.
So, Patrick, that's a very profound response to our question. You definitely have
about that.
Well, you definitely have a very noble mission. So could you talk about some of the programs you offer to aspiring filmmakers and screenwriters?
Absolutely. So for context, I think it's breaking into Hollywood or the entertainment industry on the film side, or, publishing that first novel. It's incredibly challenging. It's not exactly like a typical corporate career where you sort of just start out in the mailroom and work your way up. Every successful writer, producer, director will often have an original story on how they broke in and became successful. And so you have lots of people trying, and there's really no one path. And so that makes it challenging. So when we were looking at developing programs for folks who share these values and want to work in these creative fields, we went to the pros in the space and asked them, what should we be doing? What is the most helpful thing? So some people go to film school and get an MFA, and we've had a lot of people in our programs who've done that kind of thing. But I think one of the weaknesses is that a lot of the faculty at the MFA programs, they've been out of the industry for some years. They don't necessarily know what's going on. And then when it comes to storytelling, I think we, just like we see in academia, we have sort of this deconstructionist idea, and not one where the artist has a duty to society to write moral fiction. Not moral fiction as in didactic fiction, but fiction or film that deals with the significant moral issues of our time, so that not only are you entertained when you watch it, but you get something from it, progress as a culture. And that's just really not taught. And so then we, in constructing our programs, that's two key elements. We use mentors who are working in the industry right now, who are executive producers on television shows, who are directors of films and movies happening right now, distribution, marketing, working at firms where they're right on the cusp of all of the evolution that's going on in this industry. And then second, we have that impulse that, storytelling is important. The role of the artist and the storyteller in society is a very important one, and you should honor that. And so that's a big part of our programs. In terms of bare bones, we have an internship program, a paid internship program, where if you're on a producer track, you go and it's a paid internship program for 3 months at a production company. That can be usually at a studio or an independent production company with a studio deal, or likely a new digital platform that is in production on something. So if you are a writer, we have a pretty amazing production internship program for that, where you are literally placed with a successful working screenwriter for 3 months, and they are working with you to develop your treatment and your script and give you notes on it, so that hopefully you will make a lot of progress and be able to take that out as a sample of your work. And then we also have a film lab where you get between $10,000 to $15,000 to produce a narrative short, so not documentary. It's like sci-fi, horror, drama, comedy, Western, that has a theme of liberty, in some way, broadly construed, explores the values of liberty. And so we admit 30 people to the lab a year and produce 12 short films a year in that program. In addition to the film stuff, film programs, we have fiction and narrative nonfiction writing programs. So this is we have workshops, we have writers groups, we have internships, and we're about to launch a literary journal that will kind of be in that Victorian style, where it'll be serial content, not artsy fartsy short stories, but serial content from a variety of genres: YA, sci-fi, hard-boiled crime novel, thriller, military history, and personal memoir. with a mixture of nonfiction and fiction together. In terms of our programs, we sort of try to silo them so you can come in not knowing that much about the industry and learn a whole lot about the lay of the land and the business itself. And then as you progress in our set of programs, you're going to start focusing on your work product, which you then would use as a sample to move off into the industry and, have your career launched.
So my taste in movies with An American Carol notwithstanding, I do enjoy a great movie, and I consider myself a big moviegoer. So I was curious, could you highlight some of the projects that you're working on now?
Yeah, absolutely. At Taliesin Nexus, we have some films in the lab that are pretty exciting. One is Minty, which is the story of Harriet Tubman, only it's atypical in the sense that Harriet Tubman is this badass judo-wielding lady out in the wilderness, and in the story she finds these two slaves who are running away and rescues them by beating the crap out of this slave hunter. But that's not really the story. The story, which we learned from the actual historical Harriet Tubman, is that she carried a gun, which she said was to be used on slave hunters, those who would stop, what she was doing, Underground Railroad, and for slaves who turned back, because anyone who turned back would sort of be a risk to the whole operation. But the filmmakers, they really took that and played with it. And so the whole story is kind of crafted around, one of the slaves, basically they're in kind of a dangerous spot. They're alone in the woods and they're kind of waiting, for the next stage of the railroad. He sort of starts thinking, well, maybe we should go back. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's okay. And part of the themes that we were really intrigued to explore is just this idea that, liberty is not a safe thing. It's not a guarantee. It doesn't mean you're happy. It's challenging and difficult to be free and to be responsible. And of course, we know that to be free and responsible gives you the opportunity to pursue your own happiness. But just the notion of making the choice to be free itself is a really difficult one because freedom is scary. And so that's a pretty interesting project that we have going right now. There's another one that's really funny done by the Bragg brothers, Austin and Meredith Bragg, who are at Reason. And this is not affiliated with Reason, but it's a story of these two toughs, kind of idiots, who are kidnapping a rich guy. Only they wind up kidnapping an economist. And so when they have him back at the hotel, they're trying to figure out what to do with him. Well, should we kill him? Or, I don't know. He's not really worth anything. Meanwhile, the economist is kind of gagged. And he's like, more. And then they ungag him. And then he sort of starts, taking them through like, prisoner's dilemma, price theory, negotiations. He's like, listen, how about rather than, killing me or trying to ransom me for $5,000, why don't we split $100,000 three ways? And they're like, oh, well, explain how we would do this. And so anyway, it's kind of an interesting little economics lesson taken in, given in the hotel to these two guys. And it's really hilarious. And so those two are going on right now. And we have one more that's in post-production called The Surge. And it's The Purge. I don't know if you guys have seen the Purge films, but it's The Purge, except it's The Surge. So in the Purge films, for like one day or 24 hours, there's no law. You can do whatever you want. And so, of course, in the Purge films, rich people are killing all the poor people, which is, kind of ridiculous. But anyway, that's how those films take it. So in this short film, a parody, when the government for one day relaxes all rules and the reporters are out, expecting to find violence. But what they see instead is that people are building onto their homes without a permit, or going to the drugstore and getting drugs, that don't have, enormous taxes on them, or, having a lemonade stand out on the street. People can just come without any regulations. And then, and then the market is surging because people are doing all these things. There's not regulations to stop them. And so rather than, a purge with people killing each other when the laws are eliminated, there's a surge in economic activity that's good for everybody. So those are three projects we're pretty excited about.
Wow, I love all of those ideas. So that leads me to, PRI is a think tank, and we contribute to the liberty movement through books and research and media commentary. But we don't underestimate the power of culture in influencing the public. So how can the free market movement use film and animation and the new media to better make our ideas and solutions relatable to a broader audience?
That's a great question. We kind of have as part of our founding ethos something that Andrew Breitbart once said, that culture is upstream of politics or policy. And so that's kind of how we see ourselves in some way, creating narratives that people can reflect upon so that then when they get to start using the analytical part of their brains and, and analyzing the policies as to what's best or what best reflects their values, then they'll be like empowered to do so. And the fault has been on the side of the culture creators, not so much on the side of the policy guys. It's just that I think it's like you guys are producing great work that just in a challenging environment. It's in a challenging environment. I do think that think tanks can play a role in the culture through storytelling. And I think that it's something that it's new and it's different than the type of rigid analytical thought and, econometrics and, those kinds of tools. But I think really what, we need to do is if these values like liberty and free markets, if we believe in them and we believe that they're true, then they're true not only in an analytical sense, but they're true in an imaginative sense and in a sense of like your person. And so I think for think tanks to really like identify the stories and the emotional truths that are contained in those stories and focus on those as really important and as a vehicle to help people understand the analytical ideas, I think there's like a huge opportunity for that. And I think in terms of think tanks, as the world has been, we're seeing the digital revolution like just start eliminating these traditional power structures, going directly to the public is going to be like more and more necessary, I think. And the public is not necessarily composed of people who just love doing analytical thought. Like I myself am not necessarily a huge fan of it. That's just not what you do in your daily life, like, because you're not a policy analyst or you're not an economist. And so the ability for think tanks to be able to translate those ideas into narrative, which is really the common lingua, I think is really important. And there's a big opportunity to do that.
Often when we go to the movies, you see the bad guys or business executives or military officers or priests or religious people. I'm reminded of there was a kind of climate change themed disaster movie a few years back. I'm blanking on the name of it, but they had a Dick Cheney type was the evil one in that film. And then you see the good guys are, in that film, the crusading environmentalists or monsters from the deep blue sea. So how do you think that these kinds of reverse stereotypes shape the public's view of America's institutions?
Well, I think usually those movies bomb, which, that's still, I'm sure they make an impact on people who watch them. But for the most part, those movies bomb because I think people reject them, because they know that it's ideology that's being forced on them. It's not real. It doesn't resonate and it doesn't really give you any value. And so those movies bomb, which is like heartening to see. I think that one point you brought up, which is something that we've discussed with our mentors, often I think that the business guy is a good bad guy because you want to have a bad guy that is complex, not just like evil. If your bad guy is an evil dictator who's just Mr. Evil Guy, then your narrative isn't very complex. But if you have a business guys are good. They do stuff. They're helpful for society. They're like producing things. So, but then also they have this other side, greed or whatever that they would put in there. And so like having that multi-dimensional character to a certain extent makes like a corporation or a businessman, entrepreneur, a really good bad guy. Whereas if you're coming from it from not, let's say like our philosophical perspective, you really look at like a government worker or a government bureaucrat or to a certain extent like a politician as someone who's trying to do good. There's nothing bad there. And so it's like less of just a pure, oh man, we have this guy who should be good, but he's bad. And so I think that just makes him an attractive target. Also, I think that artists and storytellers don't understand economics. They just don't. They just, it's for whatever reason, maybe it's just not attractive to them. They can't parse it. Just think a lot of storytellers don't understand economics. They don't understand business people. It's kind of like magic. And so then there's a lazy, easy choice, which is to make the CEO or the corporation the bad guy. One thing that we encourage our folks in our program to do is kind of move past those easy things and don't be lazy. Really dive into a character and try to understand the world from their perspective. And when you do that, maybe you do have a bad guy, crony capitalist business guy. But if you've clarified it in your mind, then you can really like understand the difference between a crony capitalist bad guy and a legit, creative entrepreneur who's not a crony capitalist. And so the cool thing is that largely the public hasn't seen this. So it's really sexy and interesting to dive into these characters just because, Hollywood or like in a lot of these, in a lot of the typical films are lazy, in that they just sort of paint with a broad brush. And so the ability to dive in, like we've seen with some of these narrative series that are really exploding, we're like kind of in this golden age of television right now, is is that we're seeing more and more complex portrayals of business, not just Mr. Good, Mr. Bad Guy. And I find that to be really encouraging.
You mentioned that artists don't really understand economics. Movie theater attendance hit a 25-year low in 2017. But, we know technology and streamlining has something to do with it. But what do you think about the content and the lack of originality? Do you think that audiences are tired of Baywatch and The Mummy and the fifth installment of the Pirates of the Caribbean and a lot of these same old movie content?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things there. I mean, number one, there's just so many choices right now. I can sit at my house and have a projector almost as large as the movie screen with a sound system and watch Netflix or Amazon series that are, rather than just a 2-hour movie, are like a whole 12-episode, 12-hour story. So in some instances, why am I going to go to the theater when I can have that? And more and more Americans are going to have those options, and more and more options are going to exist. And so I think that's going to make it very difficult for the theaters. My understanding, these films, these big budget studio films, Star Wars, Star Trek, Mummy, Pirates of the Caribbean, because they're spectacle films. So, there's a lot of CGI, there's big spectacle, it's very visual, and it works really well in foreign markets. So you'll have, for some films, China is a far more important market than the United States. They literally get more revenue from ticket sales in theater in China than they will in America, or certainly like combined with other territories. So I think that's going to lead to something pretty interesting where, we see, and we're already kind of seeing it, where some of these films are not necessarily made for American audiences, so much as they would have been in the past. And so I think that in that way, yeah, we're basically seeing these films they're big budget spectacle films, all about the CGI, not so much about the story. And so then audiences are not really getting that enlightenment value out of those. And so they're going to look for it elsewhere, which I think they are in some of these long form television shows.
Similarly, TV ratings for the Oscars dropped to an all-time low this year, although I watched and I won my Oscar pool, so I was happy. But why do you think, my winnings aside, why do you think this is the case? Are audiences just growing tired of the politics?
I think absolutely. When I'm feeling kind of optimistic about our culture, these power structures were traditionally, you're told, well, this is the case and this is what you should believe. And, as what these digital technologies have done is just freed people from those things. And so I think that the audiences out there have a pretty good nose for when people are just lying to them or pushing an agenda or virtue signaling or whatever. And they're just exhausted of it, like with political correctness. Just exhausted of it. Boring, finally. It's just boring. And, I don't think people necessarily want to check in so they can just see other people virtue signaling or saying what they're saying. So I suppose parroting these views back to them. It's boring. And so, and also there's nothing really at stake. I mean, when you sort of look at the films that win relative to the films that have done well, that people are familiar with, I think since like maybe Braveheart or, perhaps more recently than that, but since Braveheart, none of these Best Picture winners are like films that anyone's seen. I imagine a lot of the folks who are tuning in haven't even seen any of these movies. The Academy is telling them, well, this is the best movie. Well, I haven't even seen it. So it's out of touch, and they're pushing agendas, and I think people rightly are fleeing that because they know that it's not real. It's just a bunch of made up, I don't know. Let me try to characterize it with the right metaphor. I think it's just a show. It's just a show. It's not real. It's not the Best Picture. It's not necessarily the best actor. There's votes, and it's political, and it's agenda driven, and so it doesn't really have any authenticity. And so it doesn't matter if it's Jimmy Kimmel or how funny you try to make it. When it lacks authenticity, that's going to turn people away.
That's actually very interesting because I'm one of those people who never see any of the top nominated films. And what I do is after they win or check out the top 5 or 6, and then I check them off my list. Like, okay, I think I should go see that because everyone else thinks it's great and it got nominated. And then usually I'm disappointed, Patrick. That's the funny part about it. So, you alluded to this earlier. In the Academy, conservatives have a difficult time getting jobs and hold back from making their opinions known for fear of being shunned by the rest of the faculty. The same holds true for Hollywood. Do you see this changing anytime soon?
Well, I think that the prospects for change are better because in Hollywood and in publishing, it's capitalist. It's capitalism. There's there's buying and selling, and there's money to be made. In the Academy, it doesn't really work that way. And so I think the Academy is easier for folks of a certain ideology to network and basically collude to only have one viewpoint, which is very bad for the Academy, of course, as we know. Diversity of opinions and ideas is where innovation comes. And if everybody thinks the same, no matter how much you're committed to the notion that it's right, you can't grow. And that's really bad for universities where the youth are going to learn to grow. In Hollywood, I do think there is this, I don't know, shunning, or I would just say probably just a general unfavorableness towards folks who would just self-identify right out there as conservative. But I think it is changing significantly. And I think it's going to change more in the future just through the democratization of media. There's just more voices. There's more voices that are getting popular, and Hollywood seeks audiences. Hollywood is about making money. If you're a production company, you want to make money. And, when you see audiences out there that are responding to certain kinds of content online, on YouTube, you want to make stuff for them, that they're going to want. And I think that's going to play a big role. And then also, I think just as we're seeing these labels like left, right, conservative, progressive, libertarian, kind of maybe get a little outdated, where people are just sort of I don't know where I fit on that space. I'm an independent, I like this, I don't like that. I like this, I don't like that. I think that we're probably trending more in that direction and away from these big superstructure ideologies. In that case, I think that we're definitely going to see a more plurality of views in Hollywood. I think when there's money to be made and there's audiences out there who are really begging for the content and signaling, then we're going to see people step up who can deliver that content.
As we close, the biggest trend today, I would say, in movie theaters is, the new concept of having dinner and a movie and a cocktail all at the movie theater. So what are liberty-minded filmmakers drinking these days?
Oh, man. Well, I cannot speak for all of the liberty-minded filmmakers, that's for sure. We have quite a diverse lot. But I'll speak for myself. I'm from Alabama, grew up probably about an hour and a half south of the Lynchburg facility, Jack Daniel's distillery. So I drink a Jack Daniel's on the rocks, straight, unadulterated by any cocktailness, though sometimes with a Diet Coke chaser.
Thanks very much, Patrick. Thanks again to our guest, Patrick Reasonover. For more information about Taliesin Nexus and the programs they offer, go to their website at talnexus.com. That's TALNEXUS.com. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or TuneIn. And please do us a favor and give us 5 stars. You can also listen to our podcast on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Also, check out our blog, Right by the Bay, on our website at pacificresearch.org. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. We hope you'll come back again for another episode of PRI's podcast.